The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Land transfers to Snuneymuxw, turning on the midtown water supply, and new turf fields and pickleball courts were some of the changes that marked 2024 in Nanaimo. City Council also faced challenges such as an inability for a second consecutive year to receive permission to borrow funds for a new public works yard. To recap the year that was at the municipal level, Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krog paid a visit to the CHLY studio. What are some of your highlights from this past year for the city of Nanaimo?
I have a very long list, and a number of things jump out, but on the issue of reconciliation, District Lot 9, which was a substantial acreage behind Mount Benson, was sold to the province in anticipation of it being transferred to Snuneymuxw First Nation, a tangible demonstration of what reconciliation is about, recognizing historical claims, and the necessity of promoting the economy of Snuneymuxw First Nation. The chief and I have said it many times and talked together many times, and we're both very conscious that what people are looking for in Snuneymuxw, as most people are, they're looking for education and employment. And employment with that property, the potential of logging activity there is very valuable. There's a number of things we can point to. And when I say we, I mean the city. I don't mean the royal we. One Terminal Avenue project, the enhancement of the main drag, if you will, through Nanaimo is very important. We turned on the midtown water supply and the Gateway project as well. Midtown water supply, as I remind everyone, it's $55 million plus buried in the ground, basically, that no one sees. But everyone knows, I hope, and understands how important it is. We only need to look to the city of Calgary and understand what a failure and the amount of damage and mayhem and misery can be caused when you don't maintain your basic infrastructure. I know that people often express concerns to the city about all kinds of issues, but our job is pretty basic. It's about water. It's about sewer. It's about garbage. It's about parks and recreation. It's about ensuring that we can pay for a police force. Around the issue of public safety, taking on what is really the province's job, the hiring the other year of the 12 CSOs and council's contemplation of hiring another 10, plus all the firefighters we've hired as well to bring us up to something approaching what should be appropriate strength for a city of our size, not just in terms of population, but also in terms of geography. I've said it on this show, I think, many times. Arguably, Nanaimo has too much geography and too few people. When you're serving 108,000 in 91.3 square kilometers, compare that to the ease, relatively speaking, of delivery of services in the city of Victoria. They're under 20 square kilometers, and they're only about 1,000 or 2,000 fewer citizens than we have here.
This year also saw a new government, a provincial election. What were your takeaways from the campaign as far as how it's going to impact Nanaimo?
Several things. Firstly, and I give the Fair Care Alliance and others who advocated, it means that we have a promise from both the opposition, led by Mr. Rustad, and the current government, led by Premier Eby, for a new patient tower. 2 years ago, that was not on the provincial government's agenda. And so this community, the advocates, and I give Donna Hayes and everyone who's worked with her the credit for ensuring that it became a priority for the government. Because I can assure you, if any of your listeners have, and I'm sure they have, been either patients in the hospital, had friends, relatives, clients, whatever, work there, they know the conditions under which healthcare workers, and from doctors down to cleaners and back up again, struggle under daily to deliver the kind of healthcare services that people, frankly, have come to expect. That's a major outcome of the provincial election in the last few years of advocacy. The second thing is, I think the provincial election results, certainly if you look at the Richmond seats, a number of the Fraser Valley seats, the loss of the two North Island constituencies, and I say this from the government's perspective because it was the government's election to lose and essentially almost did. The message is loud and clear, and I've talked about it till I'm blue in the face and tired and frustrated, and your listeners have heard me in this and other venues say it. I would hope that finally the Premier and the government have figured out that the mental health, addictions, trauma, brain injury crisis that manifests itself in homelessness and the crime associated with feeding drug habits, the tide of human misery in our streets, is indeed a vote-determining issue for people, and that it will start to get the kind of resources and priority that it deserves. Dave Whitty, who has written a number of columns for the Nanaimo News Bulletin, has called it an existential crisis. I call it a crisis. It's the crisis of our times. You do not see, and you can talk to enough people anecdotally, you can read reports, you can visit other countries yourself. North America in particular, and I'm not as concerned about the rest of the country or indeed the rest of the province, but for this city, it's obvious. If you travel abroad, you do not see the kind of street disorder and human misery in other places to the extent that you do here. And frankly, it's everywhere. Drive up the High Island Highway to Courtenay. Per capita, they are probably worse off in terms of the numbers of people who are homeless. Those suffering from mental health issues and addiction and brain injury and complex care. The Premier, 34 days before the election, finally acknowledged in I think, a fairly direct way that secure and voluntary care was appropriate for the really complex cases, something which I have been arguing for a very long time. And I think an acknowledgement generally that this was a serious issue for people. So out of the provincial election, I think two good things from my perspective. As I say, the patient tower, not the commitment to the cath lab, which I think is almost equally crucial. The catheterization lab, heart patients in Central Island are in deep trouble if you have a major coronary here. But the patient tower and the recognition of the seriousness of, again, the mental health, addictions, trauma, and brain injury crisis. So that's a good news story.
Front, if you were to advocate, do some lobbying, give a relevant minister a call, what would be the solution or the best allocation of resources you would advocate for on that?
It's nothing that I haven't said before, and again, that's why I get frustrated by talking about this. I have repeated over and over again, the government needs to acknowledge the seriousness of the problem, not just from the perspective of the people who are suffering, and that includes those in the streets, their family members, the people who are impacted by by the behaviors we see that are disturbing, frightening, and sometimes randomly criminal and criminal directly, the kind of petty theft that goes on over and over again. But also, and it should be obvious, we don't have the bricks and mortar, and by that I mean with the facilities. That's the number two thing you say. And then announce at the same time that you're going to fund the universities and colleges to train the people who deliver the kinds of services that are necessary. I've said it many, many times. I don't have the patience to deal with people who have the kind of complex issues that far too many in our streets do. That requires skills and compassion and understanding and the kind of training that enables you to provide the kind of care and support that that vulnerable population needs. We don't have the bodies right now. We literally do not have the people trained to do it, just as we have a shortage of doctors, although that's improving, and credit to the government locally. On Vancouver Island in particular, we've seen the number of family physicians available increased quite significantly. And then finally to acknowledge that this is a serious problem caused by 30, 40 years of failed social and health policy. You can go back, and I've said the same thing, same words, same language, sticking to the message over and over again. 30, 40 years of failed social and health policy, and we're not going to get out of this very quickly. But you have to give people hope. And you can't give people hope if you don't outline, acknowledge the problem, and tell us what you're going to do with it. So I am hopeful, given the comments of the Conservatives who nearly formed government and the Premier in the last election, that we will see some really positive steps. As I remind everybody, there's a throne speech and a budget and a spring session coming.
This is also about the halfway mark for this current term of City Council. How would you evaluate how things have gone so far and what you're still hoping to accomplish?
Oh, look, I've mentioned some of the major projects, but there's a number of things underway that have happened that have been good for the city and positive. We can talk about the Harewood Centennial Park artificial turf fields, which are enabling literally thousands of folks, young and old in Nanaimo, to have access to play many more hours, many more days in the year than was previously the case. We've got the 55-plus seniors games coming. We had a magnificent event to celebrate Ethan Katzberg, our Olympian, which is a wonderful role. He's a wonderful role model for young people. In terms of provincial housing, we've had to respond to and deal with the significant legislative changes involved with that, with those, encouragements from the province to do better, when in fact we've done quite well in terms of building housing. We've got the Heart and Hearth program, the provincial program. We're going to see housing at 1030 Old Victoria Road, the Travelers Lodge announcement, giving people access to services, getting them off the street, and giving them and their family and this community hope that we will see improvements. We also, happily hired when I say hired, it's an RCMP decision, but the city gets to participate. Superintendent Andrew Burton, our new RCMP superintendent, replacing Lisa Fletcher, who did an amazing job. We have a new poet laureate. Oh, and of course, we have pickleball. We have the new pickleball courts at Devon. There is a happy event. That was another accomplishment. And the updates at Westwood Lake, and I hesitate to describe it as simply as updates, but significant improvements and more to come. And if you look around the community, multiple housing projects underway, literally in terms of nails being hammered, or I guess nail-gunned into 2x4s, foundations being poured, proposals before council, proposals working their way through our planning and development services department. The city is doing very well in many respects, except, and I say except, when we come back to the issues surrounding the street disorder. And that's something, and I've been accused of not taking responsibility, evading responsibility. The solutions for it are provincial and federal, whether it's bail reform on the federal level, to ensure that people who are committing repeat crimes are held in custody pending disposition, and all the other things that go with it. But apart from that, there's lots to celebrate in Nanaimo. We're seeing the work done in Commercial Street. Frustrating, I know, for local businesses until it's completed, but once that portion of the work is completed and the others carried out for the long-term plan, you're going to see a wonderful revitalized downtown. We've got the old A&B Sound building nearly completed. To come back to the housing issue, as I said, multiple units across the city, but just in the downtown core alone, you've got the magnificent building going up on the old TELUS site, the Caledonian Clinic site. Last night, Council gave approval to the works for between Chapel and Skinner, a wonderful new proposal. A significant number of rental units, including, I think it's 6 two-bedroom townhouses. So, as I say, there's lots to be happy about, and I think that's happening because you've had a stable council, and I say this not about myself, but about the council, a stable council that does its homework. We may not always agree, and indeed often do disagree, and often I'm in a minority position on various votes, and I'm okay with that. But it's a council that functions without the kind of rancor that exists in other communities. And it's also prepared to take on challenges and not always do what is the popular thing. And in politics, it's lovely if the popular thing is also the best thing. but that's not often the case.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. Support and grow our nonprofit newsroom project today at chly.ca/donate with a monthly or one-time donation. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
Today on the program, we're hearing from Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krog, who paid a visit to the CHLY studio to recap 2024. In terms of major capital projects for the city of Nanaimo, there are a number on the horizon as potentialities: South End Community Center, a new RCMP detachment, a waterfront walkway, and of course the public works yard. How do you envision getting some of those across the finish line, or even bringing them as options to ask the voters whether they want to get them across the finish line in the next 2 years?
The alternative approval process is designed for capital projects like the improvements to the Labio Works Yard. And I would be less than honest if I didn't say I was extremely disappointed that the alternative approval process didn't succeed, that there were a number of people who believed it wasn't either necessary or were convinced it wasn't necessary. It was a need to, not a nice to have, in my view. That remains my position. Council will receive a report in the new year from staff about what the alternatives are for us and a practical way to deal with it. But you're quite right about the other projects. The South End Community Center, long overdue, much deserved, and much needed. The pressure on our recreational facilities is substantial. And this isn't unusual. On one hand, you've got some taxpayers saying, oh, we don't want to spend any money, we don't want to borrow any money, and yet you've got a whole bunch of other taxpayers, so to speak, or ratepayers, citizens who are saying, oh, golly, we need these facilities. The reality is the RCMP building is outlived its usefulness in terms of its size and functionality. A waterfront walkway has been on the dream and wish list for many people in this community for a very long time. It would be a wonderful amenity, both from a recreational perspective, but also in terms of its attraction for tourists. Imagine being able to walk from Departure Bay all the way to downtown in safety and security along our amazing waterfront. That's a pretty important thing. You're probably looking at referenda on those, though, because referendums are designed to deal with, generally speaking, things that are important to the community, but maybe not absolutely necessary in the sense that if you need a bridge across a river, that's a necessity if you can't get across the river. I'm using a simplistic example. But in terms of a walkway across a river, when you already have a bridge, a walkway that connects two paths, that arguably is a nice to have. Maybe you just force people to walk across the sidewalk on the bridge. Again, a simplistic example. And many might see the waterfront walkway as a nice to have, but not a need to have. I think it's a nice to have. I wouldn't put it in the same category as the Works Yard or the police station or the South End Community Center, though. But again, arguably those are nice to haves as well. But you know, the AAP process was used for the fire station, which everyone's very happy to have, I'm sure. And if we have any kind of a disaster, and those disasters are happening with increased frequency around us, you only have to look at the slides on the Sea to Sky Highway the other day, the loss of life, the damage from windstorms, tide, all those kinds of issues. We need to have a safe, secure place for our workers to maintain our equipment, so that in the event of a disaster, we can respond quickly and appropriately. And we need to maintain our infrastructure so we don't end up with a Calgary mess. We were just very lucky with the blowout of the water pipes on Bowen Road a few years ago, which encouraged everyone, I think, to recognize the importance of the work that's been done with the midtown water supply.
Now, I think important context to note when we talk about the AAP is that this was the third one on this particular issue, and that may have played into things. But also, just outside of Nanaimo this year, there was an AAP around a water reservoir in Nanaimo that was defeated, an AAP in Ladysmith around a town hall that was defeated. not to paint all those issues with the same brush, but has there been a change just in the way local governments and citizens in municipalities everywhere around Vancouver Island are looking at the process? Do you think something needs to change about the process?
Well, last night, Council approved a resolution to go to the AVICC, eventually the UBCM, asking the provincial government to refine the legislation around the use of the alternative approval process and to give municipal governments greater opportunity, if you will, to simply go to the province and say, we want to borrow money for a public works yard. We need your approval. Please sign here. Your listeners need to be reminded, we're the only province in Canada that forces municipal governments to rely on an alternate approval process. I mean, it's been called anti-democratic. In fact, arguably, by giving citizens the ability to stop what are, in my view, needed projects, it's way more democratic than every other province in Canada. And we've simply, the resolution basically says, look, if it's needed and a council's decided it's needed and the staff of council and it's supported by the council, then we should be able to go to the province and say, look, we want to borrow the money to do this. Give us your okay and get on with it, which is true in every other province in Canada. So I think that may come. It won't be high in the province's priority list, though. Speaking about what happened at Nanaimo with the ratepayers in Fairwinds and Nanaimo area and what happened in Ladysmith, I think there's a general crankiness, if you will, amongst voters, a general sense of frustration, fear around the economy, the impact of inflation. You know, we came through COVID. We've got I have no hesitation in saying this, a fairly frightening situation, speaking of our relationship with the United States, the threats from the incoming president, the quality of individuals that he appears likely to have appointed to the most powerful positions in the government of the United States. This is a time of great uncertainty and fear. The ongoing war in the Ukraine, what's happening in the Middle East with Gaza and Israel, the fall of the government in Syria. These are very challenging times with a number of crises around the world. The government of China's push and aggressive attitude towards Taiwan. Voters are scared, I think, and anger comes from a place of fear, I'm told by psychologists. I think there's a certain amount of that. The sense amongst younger people they're not going to enjoy the same lifestyle their parents or grandparents have enjoyed. Speaking as someone who's 71, born in 1953, having lived through the joys of the longest, generally continuous period of economic growth and development in the history of the world post-war, I think a number of people don't see their future looking like, I'll say, my past. And that provides a certain disturbing view.
How open would you be to, instead of borrowing for the project, just raising property taxes a whole bunch 1 year kind of thing?
I can't see doing that realistically. I think it would create an incredible amount of division in the city and potentially significant hardship. It's like a mortgage. No one expects you to pay $800,000 cash for a house in Nanaimo unless you're really rich. They expect you to put some money down and pay it off over time. And that's what we should be doing with a project like this, because the benefit of it extends over a long period of time. So no, I'm not. I think you'd see pigs flying before you'd see me vote to pay it off in a year or two or three. It's not realistic. But we shall see. We're waiting for staff's recommendation. Council's thinking long and hard about it. I know Council cares and is concerned. And I know our workers are looking for leadership in this issue as well, because they know the importance of it. And quite candidly, those people who took the time to tour the facility as it exists, generally speaking, came away saying, oh, I understand now why it needs to be done.
Would you have a particular Christmas message to deliver to people in Nanaimo?
Notwithstanding how you may be feeling, and for all the reasons that make you maybe feel down or deprived or upset, I've always thought that Christmas was a time to reflect on what's happened in the past year and to count your blessings, to reflect on those things that have given you joy and pleasure, to be grateful for those things that have made you feel fulfilled or better about yourself. And one of the things that you can do to actually do that is something I say over and over again. We are at our best when we're doing for others. So if you really want to feel good and do something wonderful, give somebody something. Give of your time to a community organization. Throw a few extra bucks if you've got them in the kettle when that Sally Ann volunteer is out there. Go down to Loaves and Fishes. Go to some of the many nonprofits that support families feeling stress, individuals feeling stress. Just do something nice for somebody. It's really quite fulfilling, I think, and that would be my hope and wish for people over the Christmas holidays.
Mayor Krog, thank you so much for coming down to CHLY.
Always a pleasure. Good fortune to the station. We need as many voices as we can in this wonderful country, and they need to be supported.
Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krog speaking with me in the CHLY studio. That conversation was recorded last week. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.